Quite very well, but
Okay, since we have such a limited time, I'm gonna begin.
Can you hear me now, Jim?
Yeah, well, that's much
Better.
better, but I moved to this side of the room. All right. I'm gonna begin because we are past 8 and we have quorum. And I know we have very little time here, so. I do note the existence of a quorum with 8 of our members, and please let the minutes record that we have a quorum along with the names of the members who are present. We sent our draft agenda around. Does anybody have any proposed changes to our agenda?
More
No.
brief discussion of an administrative issue is the quarterly billing of expenses. I have a question that I'd like to address sometime, maybe in the open forum.
Right, we will try to get to that. If not, we will, is it something we could deal with after the meeting?
Probably, possibly, yeah.
Okay, so we'll try to get to it. If we don't get to it, we'll do it after the meeting.
I
If
move
not-
approval of the agenda.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Do I hear any opposition?
That's a second online.
Second, okay. If I don't hear any opposition, we will consider the agenda adopted by unanimous consent. Okay, approval of the minutes of December 13th that previously circulated. Do we have any proposed changes to the minutes? No, not, I'll ask for a motion.
Move approval of the minutes.
I'll second it.
I second. We have 2 seconds. Do I hear any opposition? Not hearing any opposition, we will consider the agenda, the minutes from December adopted by unanimous consent. Okay, we will move directly to our reports by study groups. You'll see on the agenda that I have tried to allocate minutes rationally. We'll try to keep to it, but I understand some of these discussions may be more complicated and take longer than others, so we'll see it. But we really do need to get, I think, through all 4 groups at least today, because that will make us, it'll make us a lot easier for February when we may be taking straw votes to see where people stand. Let's start off with group 1, voter direct election of council president. Do we have a representative from group 1 who has been designated to take the lead on this?
I think I'm designated.
Everybody took 2 steps back and you went there.
Some of us here are too online.
So the question for group 1, the term of council president, really, there are a lot of options when it comes to this. Sorry, I have 2 sections, and one is the term of the council president, and the other is term limits for council president, and I think they dovetail quite nicely. But as far as the group is concerned, what we're the question, I'll start with the question. Sorry, I need more coffee. The question that arose was whether the office of president of the county council should be a separate office. And if it is a separate office, should it be directly elected by the voters? This question came to us by Evan Glass, who was then president of the county council, and subsequently also by council president Friedson, who reiterated that they would like more time to accomplish their aims, that 1 year is insufficient time. The county code currently discusses election of the council president every January, which implies a 1-year term. So should we amend the charter, which would then amend the code to have a longer term for council president? And if so, should it be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? And the other option, basically, and there are permutations, but the other option is to leave the charter alone, but allow the county council to amend the code on their own, because they have that authority. And they themselves then can change the term to greater than 1 year. There's been a lot of input among the group in terms of pros and cons. One theme that kept coming up is the concern over inadvertently creating a power struggle between the county council, the council president, and the county executive. We don't want to inadvertently create an executive when we already have an executive. And that is where our discussion is. There are some models for this. The big question is, do we want to follow those models? Do we believe that these models are sustainable? So I don't know if we want to discuss where our group kind of landed, or if we should just allow a further discussion among the larger group.
No, I would personally would appreciate hearing where the folks who have been talking about this the longest came out first before we open it up to those of us who haven't studied it.
Yeah, the biggest concern, and some of our members have worked in government before and have seen this create some conflict in what used to be a peaceable kingdom. When a president is there's something there. The word president is very nuanced, and it implies a lot of authority. In our federal government, it's the executive branch. And so now we're taking that and putting that into our legislative branch on the local level. And so that creates some confusion. In the report also, I have attached what are the duties of the president of the county council, and the duties are largely ceremonial, with the addition of speaking the spokesperson for the county council. So if the president of the county council is elected separately by the voters to a separate office, then they no longer speak necessarily for the majority of the council. They speak for the office of the president. And so for have I failed to mention any other reasons? Please jump in.
I'll jump in, Jim, if I can. I want to jump in a bit. In one of my prior roles, I actually implemented this with a city commission, and the result was less than desirable. So they had a council that appointed their president. They did it every 2 years, not every 1 year. And we changed to elected by seat, including a president seat, council president seat. And what that caused was the council president no longer was working to build consensus among the council members, but instead working to get enough votes to be elected council president every 2 years, or every 4 years. And so what I recommended to our group was that we instead increase the current term of a council president to 2 years, so that there is some continuity, but not move towards an elected council president. In my experience, that increases the politics, it splits the nature of the council, and it doesn't facilitate problem solving in a way that's really good for the body.
So I don't see that as one of the options in your report. I must be missing it, but could you point to which of the options is just increase
That's the county code. That's the county code option, because they can do that themselves.
Which option? Well, they could do that themselves, but they haven't done that themselves, and they asked the county president talked about it to us. So we should probably I mean, have you thought about just having it as an option? Change the charter to specify the years.
Yeah, the reason why we chose it that way is because the requirement to elect the council president every 1 year occurs in the county code, not in the county charter. And so we were reluctant to alter the county charter to require this when it is actually in the code. The charter is silent as to the number of years.
But we could make it not silent.
We could.
I think the only reason the question is that if we believe the body strongly enough that they should do it, we can suggest to them, you know, they're the ones who have to do it either way, right? No matter how they decide to do it, it's still them, it's not us. And so the question is, do y'all want to put it in the code, or do you want to tell the voters to put it in the charter to force future council to do it, we may not put it in the code? Part of it is whether they'd always do it, impose it on themselves, but then you're saying by putting it in the charter, it imposes it on future councils, right?
Correct.
I am always for the simplest option. Hi, it's Cece. I'm always for the simplest option. If the county council members can do it themselves, then let them do it themselves. I'm not a fan of creating more work unnecessarily.
And I didn't bring this up to the group, but having the school board president at one time, we actually had a discussion amongst the school board about whether or not it would be preferable, and that would have been very radical to do it in the state of Iowa, to actually have the board president elected by the people directly as opposed to be a member of the board. And you know, I think some of the same arguments came up about whether or not it would then put the school board president in a different light, would emphasize more getting elected as a more emphasis or more energy towards getting elected as opposed to gaining consensus amongst the board and being this unified voice as much as possible, you know, in terms of supporting education in that school district. So what Jeffrey brought up earlier, and definitely we also for a time lived the possibility of that, but then decided to keep it that way. And as far as I know, in that school district where I was president of the board, it still remained the same.
If you, I guess, was there consideration given to as to whether or not it makes sense to expand it from 1 year to 2 or from 1 year to 4? Is there any discussion about whether or not 2 is a better option or 4, or why it's a better option?
Yeah, we didn't discuss that quite as much in depth because we spent so much time on answering the first question, which is should we use the county charter to do this at all? And so then the subsequent, should it be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? It's really yeah, it was. I think because we had no strong feelings either way.
Correct.
So are there other aspects of your discussion consideration you want to go through? That's a lot. Some of my questions really dealt with, if you're going to elect, how would you do it? And I guess the question is since you seem to be, if I'm reading it right, it seemed to be, nobody really seemed very much in favor of going to direct election. Did you take the next step and go say, well, but if we were going to, this is how we would do it, or you just said it wasn't on the table?
In my way of thinking, we didn't go that far.
Yeah, I did, and it got quite complicated in my head. we could, if the president is directly elected and it sets up an imbalance of power, then there could also be elected by the county council a vice president who then would take over for the president perhaps after 2 years. So that way you would have a president directly elected by the voters and a president elected by the council. And then things got very complicated very fast.
All right. So I guess maybe this would be a good time to open up the discussion to folks who were not particularly involved or vested in group ones this year. See whether or not they have other questions, but I wanted to see whether or not we have agreement or whether or not folks have different views. David.
I'm not opposed to the idea of a term limit of 2 years. I would think a 4-year term limit would be unreasonable. I think there's a value in the fact that someone who is elevated to the president or chair position in the council for a 2-year period knows they're going to return to their regular job after that 2-year period, and it fosters I think collegiality, that you don't want to get too big for your britches during that 2 years, because you know you're going to be back as a regular councilman and somebody else is going to be chairman, and you don't want to leave a bad taste in everybody's mouth. I would not oppose a 2-year limit, but I certainly would not be in favor of the longer one.
So I don't know whether or not in your deliberations, I'm not sure whether or not you actually were talking about how long they would serve or whether they would be limited to those number of years. I took the discussion as being about how long the appointment would be originally for, not what the maximum limit might be for how long they might be president or how many times that might be president.
Yes, how many times is actually addressed in group 2. But addressing the question, should all of these options be definitively laid out in the county charter as opposed to the county code, was the first question.
Can I add something? From my perspective, the 2 years gives the opportunity for 2 people during a 4-year term to have that experience and be the president. If you go with a 4-year, then basically you've set up one person for 4 years. There aren't that many, there's not that big a learning curve for this role that you couldn't do 2 years and 2 years, just from my perspective.
I guess one of the things that I look at, you talked in your memo about, you gave quite a nice, useful background about the powers and what the president does and doesn't do. And to me, it read more as these are largely administrative, or not ceremonial, but administrative and functions that somebody has to be there and do it. Somebody has to receive it, somebody has to send it, whatever. And so the question is given the fairly limited powers, do you see a need to limit the number of years somebody might take on that role? If in fact the other members of the council say, well, this is who we choose, or this is who we think is, the person we want to do it. Given the type of role it is, do you see any reason to limit the number of years?
No, the charter and the code are silent as to that, and they've so I see no reason to put that in if there hasn't been a need up to this point. But expanding to 2 years would be different.
I take it David might disagree.
Well, I just wonder, is there ever an occasion when the members of the council sit down and have to figure out who they're going to select, and everybody takes 2 steps back? Is it possible no one wants the job, in which case you sort of whomever
highly doubt that's the issue.
Or 3 people want the job, and then
I'm
you
sure
got to
there
decide
are
among the 3.
egos in the room, so many people may want the job, and then but I just wonder what the group dynamics are of
That's the
If we-
value in
if
going to
we
2 years.
suggest A two-year term. And then someone stands for election to the council again, can they stand for another two-year term? As the president and their sixth, fifth and sixth year, sixth and seventh. Could be, someone could be elected to the council. Up to 3 times, so they could conceivably serve as president 3 times.
It-
2 years
if-
each.
Um,
And, assuming that the other council members thought they did a good job, that's potentially good.
But that's possible now too.
Yes, and,
And it never happened. It has
Also-
never happened. So I'm not sure that we need to weigh in on something where the exact opposite is the case. Yeah, in practice, it's never happened that only one time it's happened that someone's been elected to be president 2 times in a row. That was Ike. And that's an anomaly. And what Evan Glass was talking about is how, in fact, what happens is every year you have chop and change. I think so. So I'm just going to put my opinion on the table. I don't think there is any real case for an elected president. I think that should be taken off the table. I think that in your report, options 1 and options 4 look like they're the same. That might be, maybe I have the wrong version of the report, but that jumped out at me. I think that there is given what Evan Glass talked to us about, there is a case to be made for a 2-year term. And I think that putting it in the charter, there is a case to be made for putting it in the charter. The fact that at current, they all note that there's a problem with having a one year president's term, but they're not willing to change it because of the power dynamic, because everybody wants to be the president and doesn't want to let somebody else be the, so, you've got the same people making the policy who are benefiting from the status quo. And our job is to, in spite of the status quo, as impartial, objective observers, to say what we think is the best approach. So I think that the 2-year in charter, it would be where I would go.
I
Learning
concur.
curve
I
seems to
concur.
be-
I concur with Dylan. This is Cece. 100%.
I'm with Dylan as well.
Yeah, as I say, the 2-year term seems like a reasonable, thing to consider. Both Evan and Andrew, particularly Evan, having been through a year, felt that a year wasn't quite enough, given the learning curve and the like. So to consider a 2-year term and to make a change to the charter seems like a reasonable approach.
I'm gonna stop right because we're getting very close to taking our straw vote here around the table, which we will do ultimately, but just keeping an eye on the clock and the number of issues we have to get through. I'm gonna suggest that I think we've had enough discussion to have a pretty good idea of where folks stand and what the issues are. It looks like maybe when we do meet in February, we'll be prepared to have the actual straw vote. I think what I'd ask now is there anything specifically people want, or if they have any asks of group 1, please come back to the next meeting with? Is there any additional information they want or anything they think will add to the discussion? What are we asking group 1 to do in the interim? Come back and we'll vote, or is there anything you want them to do in the meantime?
I would like to see them lay out the argument that we would have to give to the public for justifying the change. What is the current situation? Is there really a problem that needs to be cured by a public vote changing the charter? And since the council can change this on its own, it seems to be a hard sell. So I think that, what are the talking points? What's the elevator pitch for getting a member of the public to vote yes?
So you'd like to see a more clear argument of charter versus council do it on your own?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think if group 1 is leaning towards we shouldn't act, I think having doing the work of having an elevator pitch of why we should act is counterproductive. That does not seem like what group 1 is proposing at all.
may be a sentiment within the rest of the commission
Okay,
here.
so I mean, first of all, I don't want you to feel like you can't do that. I mean, you can certainly, if you say, I want to make this argument, I would like to lay it out how I would argue with that. Please.
Well, I'm not part of the group, so
No, I'm saying, but you are welcome to take a stab at it so that you feel like you've made your best case. I mean,
okay.
I want you
Well,
to
and
prevent it.
frankly, I'm leaning a hand against it, so. My straw vote would probably not be in favor, but, yes, I would rather not have to go through that
Okay.
exercise.
Okay. All right, any other comments before I move to the next topic? Okay. Thank you all. It was a very productive discussion. All right, moving on to group two. Do we have a representative from group two who has been delegated to kick off the discussion?
Mike, since you're there, do you want to take the lead on this?
Okay, I hadn't prepared to speak very much about this. CC, feel free to weigh in, okay?
Yeah, I think if you go through the pros and cons, which you outlined excellently, and I'll just hop in and talk about the discussion items. How's that sound?
Okay, sounds good. The question for group two, primarily, it was broader as in the minutes and in the agenda. That is, group two was to look at council election and structural issues or structure issues. I think CC, if you know, again, feel free to weigh in. We narrowed it down to a question: are staggered elections something that the commission and the council should consider? I think in listening to Evan and Andrew, particularly Evan, I believe, he felt that some sort of staggered election for the council members, for the 11 council members, made sense. There's several reasons, pro statements that could be made in favor of that. And what that would mean is there's different permutations of this. The simplest would be to pick, there'd have to be a starting point. We're suggesting it would be, practically speaking, 2026 would probably be the earliest that this could be kicked off. So some number of 11 council members would be selected for a 4-year term. There would have to be some grandfathering of the rest of the council members. And then 2 years later, the rest of the council members be elected for a 4-year term. And then going forward, some years in the future, you would have one group in office for 4 years, and then there would be a couple-year overlap, and then the others elected. Probably probably everybody around the table has some experience with that. I personally have, where it is useful to have some people who have some knowledge about what's going on and how to operate and what are some of the major topics that are being discussed and the issues that are being discussed by that particular body. So you have some institutional knowledge that remains on that particular board of the organization as new people come in. So that's kind of a pro. I'm jumping ahead, but that's a pro to doing this. Practically speaking, what we would have, as a commission, I guess, and make a recommendation to the council, if we want to make a charter change, is we have to figure out what group of council members would be included in that staggered election. Would it be, one idea would be, as I think CC, you might want to elaborate upon this. It would be the at-large, perhaps it would be 4 council members, the at-large group that would be elected as a group, and then the district ones, the 7, would be elected for a 4-year term. So depending on which one starts, you could have the 7 elected in 2026, have the 4 district members retain their seats for another 2 years and then them elected. So that's one idea. Or, as we suggested in our rewrite of the charter, on page 2, and that's right up. And these are just words that, for argument's sake, if you will. What we were suggesting initially was we would stagger 6 members, including 2 at-large members and 4 district members starting in 2026. The balance of the 5 would be elected 2 years later. So, one idea.
Does the group have a preference for those 2 options? Did the group have a preference?
So the first idea was to more or less evenly split the 11 members, and that's why there was a conversation of 6 and 5. I took another view of it in terms of ease of communication and ease of public understanding. When you're talking about ease of communications and public understanding, people really don't right now know what their council district is. So having voters, trying to figure out if they're voting for whoever their district member is on one cycle or another cycle could be confusing. However, if you have all of the district elections all happening at the same time, everybody knows that they are voting for their district members at one cycle. And then if you have all at large staggered for the other 2 years, everyone again is voting for the at large all at the same time. So in terms of ease of the voters understanding who they're voting for, every single voter in Montgomery County will have a vote for a county council person every single cycle. Does that make sense to y'all? Because every voter is voting for the at-large. And then 2 years later, every voter is voting for their district council member.
I think that's the best point I've heard so far. It's not like a fabulous point. It's if you think about how the school board works, and if you're a voter in Montgomery County a long time, I defy you to explain how the school board elections work and who you're voting for at what time and whether you know it. I'll tell you, it's very confusing to me.
Right, it's interesting. When we were first talking about this about a month ago, I was thinking it would be divided in 6 or 5. And then when CC raised the point that, well, it'd be better to do at district, the at-large as a group, and then the districts as a group. That makes more sense, honestly. It's easier to explain it, and probably it would be for those council members inclined to consider the staggered election, probably be perhaps an easier sell.
The last 2 items for discussion by this body is there is a language that the selection of members to serve until the first election will be approved by affirmative vote of a supermajority of the council. We need to decide what that supermajority is. Is it, 6 obviously isn't a supermajority because 6 is a plain majority. Do we want the supermajority vote of the council to be 7 votes, 8 votes, or 9? I feel pretty strongly it should not be unanimous. It's just too hard to get unanimity on anything. So there is a conversation for this body what a supermajority vote of the council will be, 7, 8, or 9.
So Cece, group 3 is about to discuss the supermajority issue, and I think it would make sense for them to be the same.
Okay,
So
perfect.
it may be when we talk about that triggers a good answer.
I have a confession. I understand the idea that if you're going to decide something happens by supermajority, you have to decide what that means. But I confess that I don't think I understood what the option was, what we were doing by supermajority. I'm not sure I understand the option. I understand there's going to be a transition issue, but
Yeah, and let me read directly section 102, composition and elections. It is highlighted in yellow for the folks who have the attachment. The council shall be composed of 11 members, each of whom shall be a qualified voter of Montgomery County. In 2026, and that's parenthetical if it's going to be 2026, and thereafter, council members will be elected for staggered terms with 7 members to coincide with the presidential elections and 4 members to coincide with the Maryland gubernatorial election. The selection of members to serve until the first Maryland gubernatorial election will be approved by an affirmative vote of the supermajority of the council.
What I'm reading in the copy I've got.
Yeah, I apologize. The copy you have was the first draft done by Mike where we were still doing 6 and 5, and I did not change that. I apologize. That was an oversight for me.
But if you're already established that all of the at-large are not going to be part of a group to be elected in the first election, that it'll all be the district members, then there's no reason for the council to have to select anyone. If you've already selected them by saying the at-large stand over here and the district will stand over here. Why would you need a supermajority to make a selection? Because you have a clear dividing line. You're not, if you were going to do a 6 and 5 with some districts and some at large in each, then it might make sense to worry about who is in the first group and who's in the second. But if the first group is always the district and the second group is always the at large, you don't need a supermajority to decide that.
That's a good flag. Mike, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's interesting point. If we did the at-large second, there would be 4 at-large members who only served a 2-year term. So there'd be, that would have to be, clearly communicated.
Right.
Can I?
But
So I'm walking through this and here's what I think I see. 2026, you have 11 people sitting on the council. They were elected to serve until 2026. Can't change that. Their terms all end in 2026. On that day, December 5th, 2026, none of those people have a job yet, right? Because they haven't been elected. What you're going to do in 2026 is pick 7 new district members. And at that point, those 4.
It's going to be election.
Right.
Election.
Okay. And so so you have 4 at-large members whose terms will end, okay? And you're not going to you're proposing not to reelect them under the charter as at-large until 2028. And so for that 2-year period between 2026 and 2028, if I'm hearing you correctly, what I'm hearing is we'd like to pick 4 new at-large members to serve 2 years only till 2028. And how we pick them is, I'm hearing a proposal that they be picked some way other than direct election by the voters.
No, I don't think so. I mean, this is just one idea. An election would be held in 2026. It's just another variation on the same theme, I guess. An election would be held in 2026 for at-large members, for 4 at-large members, and that term would only be 2 years.
Where does the supermajority question arise?
Well, that interesting point. The fact, if we go to one group or another group, and it's not necessary, that line can come out. It's not necessary. It simplifies things if we have a group of at-large members and then the 7 district members as 2 separate groups. There really isn't a need for it.
And there was a flag that a couple of people had that is valid. Why would somebody run for a 2-year office versus a 4-year office? Well, you're going to run for a 2-year office because you have the power of incumbency when 2028 comes around, right? If you have been elected and you serve well, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be reelected in 2028. I think if we make that point for the at-large office holders. That makes sense to me. Jeffrey, I see you nodding your head. You had thoughts?
Question.
I just I agree with that. I mean, I think that the idea of having everybody running in 26 with the at-large going for 2 years and the district ones going for 4 years, that's how you get the staggered. And yes, the at-large members that run for 2 years may not like the idea of only being there for 2 years, but they do have that incumbency that backs them up when they run again in 2 years. So
And it's a one-time thing. It only happens once.
Absolutely.
I have a question. Is the contemplation that there would be elections for the council in the presidential year as well as the gubernatorial year?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
And that is also, I believe, a strong plus because we know that there is an increased turnout in the
Yeah, I
president.
think that's, I think that maybe requires a little more thought in terms of the point that was just raised about turnout. It's, turnout is maybe 100% of voters in Montgomery County are pretty close. It's very high turnout in the presidential year.
83%.
83%, that's about as high as it can get. And in a gubernatorial year, less so, which has been the statewide year. So I think that's a factor in terms of council members or those running for the council in the presidential year, simply because the universe of voters would be so much greater in the presidential year, costs more money. You have to raise more money. And so that's just, I think that's a factor to be considered. And you could also get swept up in presidential politics if there's a primary. And I don't know if we never had that before because our elections have been in the gubernatorial year, but it would be an X factor for council elections if you had it in the presidential year. For that reason. Thank you.
Did the group consider, since we're changing the charter anyway, just extending the terms of the at-large members for an additional 2 years so that they don't have to stand for election? Because they're, you know, as a one-time exception to the rule, you give them 6 years this one time, as opposed to making them all stand for 2 years of election. Was that considered? And if so, what was the consensus about it?
Or I'll let the group speak because I don't know what they consider. I would, first thing I would ask a lawyer, is this constitutionally under Maryland law, whether you could do that?
Yeah, we absolutely did consider it. I was concerned about the constitutional issues, just like Jim said. I think it would, you know, if it's a constitutional issue, then we'll have to do a constitutional amendment, which seems like a whole lot harder for what we're doing right here.
Many years down the road before you had accomplished that.
Exactly.
But taking an elective office and suddenly saying, we changed our charter, so you people now hold offices for some time that the voters didn't put you in there. I don't see legally how you'd get there, but.
Right.
And also the last thing, I do want to, again, give kudos with the Mike who did this advantages and disadvantages really well in the memo. I talked to a couple of county council people, Gabe Albernaz, and I'm sorry, the last name just slipped out of my brain. Sorry, I need another cup of coffee too. And they agreed very strongly and overwhelmingly about doing this would help preserve stability. Right now we have virtually a whole brand new county council because everybody gets elected at the same time. And the only reason, according to them, that this isn't a mess, having a bunch of brand new people serve as chair and vice chair of multiple committees, is that we were lucky enough to elect people to this council who are very experienced in government. So even though there is a learning curve, there's not so much of a learning curve as if we would have elected a bunch of people that's new to government. But he said that, you know, having lightning strike like that twice is unlikely. And so the ability to preserve stability by not having the entire council replaced in one election would make their jobs a lot easier.
There is another reason, the US Constitution staggers votes, and the US constitutional framers the reason that they decided to stagger votes was because there is a mood of the electorate, and they wanted the legislative body to reflect not just swing from one mood to another, but to the staggering helps to even out those swings, so that different parts of the electorate, different parts of the legislature are voted in at different times, reflecting different moods of the electorate as a whole. So that is a pro that could be put alongside the issue of continuity.
Well, and at the time the Constitution was written, the state legislatures selected the senators. So again, you're still reflecting the state as opposed to the mood of the general public. And that the mood of the state legislature as opposed to the general public with that staggering. Because no state elected both their senators at the same time.
I'm willing to give it back to the chair.
Oh, thank you. So let me ask you, in terms of, part of our job is, this is one thing I like hearing all the different views and things that we're considering. And part of our job is sort of to build a record. All right, the council, we're 11, 10 folks, and we have an opinion, and there are 11 folks, they'll have their opinion. And part of our effort in helping them is to say, but we took some time and we kind of built a little bit of a record for you so that you could, have that before you make your decisions. And so one of my questions is, did you look for any sort of case studies or examples where either in Maryland, we have counties that have switched from one system to the other, and they could kind of look at the impact and say, well, here's what happened to campaign financing and here's what happened to turnout, and it worked out okay or it worked out not so okay. I mean, I guess the question is, do we have any sort of examples or case studies to look at?
Yet to be done, yet to be done. I think CC, I think that's we can do that. We haven't done that.
And I mean, I think it would certainly help me. I think Andrew did express, I think it was Andrew to express some concern, because you have this system where candidates locally here get to decide whether they want traditional financing or they want to go through public financing. And that may look very different than a presidential election where you have a huge turnout and you need public financing, right? And if you have a local election, when you have a much smaller turnout, your public financing option might be a better option, but you have candidates that are a huge disadvantage if you put them in a presidential year and they can't raise the money it takes to reach that many voters. Your total cost of dollar per vote goes way up, right? You got a lot more money to raise to get a lot more votes because your base is higher.
Well, where does the money come from for public financing? And how many candidates?
Allocated out of the budget. I mean, we did. Montgomery County's only run, I think it's 1 or 2 elections under the public finances.
So 5 candidates run in a district, all 5 candidates can file for the equal amount of public finance.
It's a complex system. You have to raise, you get expense matching. You raise a certain amount in private and then they match it, but that limits how much you can't take large donations if you're doing the public. You got to keep your donations small and then you get managed. And some of our council members have used that and some have used the other. So, but this would affect, what makes it viable. And my guess is you'd have to look at that and see whether it actually works. And I don't know whether we have the ability to do that or not, but it would be an interesting question to ask people who do campaign financing, what they would project the result of that to be.
Sounds like the election commission. Or election board. Speak consultant.
I don't know whether our Board of Elections would have any experience in that, but I think the folks who do campaign financing, who raise money and who run with it.
There is a committee that looks at what is the need for, how much money is needed for public financing. There's another committee like this. Consider that question.
So the election board doesn't concern itself with how much money is needed for
The elections just runs elections.
election, that they don't control that money. Okay.
Okay, so that's one of the things that would help us as we want a meeting in February, if we have a little more background on what the implications are, either for voter turnout or finance. Anything else before we turn to group 3?
Yeah, there's the first part of group 2 that got thrown in was term limits for the council president. And I apologize. I submitted this very late when I realized it wasn't in the whole packet. I have copies here for everybody, but the question that came up is if the office of county council president is elected separately, is if we recommend to the voters or recommend that that a separate office is created.
Thank you.
To allow election, then should there be a term limit? Since then the council president would be could they have this separate office? And is that in addition to their role as council member?
Can I make just an organizational suggestion? Could this be a separate group? I wonder if it,
Well, I guess the question on the table is,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was just me. And it got pushed into group 2,
No,
but it dovetailed into group 1. So we could for the
Group
next session,
5.
fold that in.
Or make it a separate group 5?
well, I guess the question on the table is, do we have members who want to continue down the path of electing a council president? Because if not, this question's moved, right?
Correct.
Is there anybody who's feels strongly about continuing down the path of advocating for an elected president? And if so, I recommend that they take this part of it on.
I think it might be premature to make a decision whether we're continuing or not. I think we need to let her go but I think it probably needs separate study, and it doesn't seem to be fitting into group 1 or group 2. So I'm thinking maybe it should be group 5.
No, I think it very much fits into group 1. Group 1 is considering the issue of whether there should be a separate elected president. And in that consideration, it would make sense to also consider the idea of whether that specific office should be term limited. I think that would be very a natural. If you didn't answer that question, you haven't answered the whole, you haven't addressed the whole question anyhow. So I think putting it in group 1 makes a lot of sense, because if group 1 if group 1 ends up deciding not to recommend an elected president, then this doesn't have to be addressed.
It's a moot point if we're recommending that we simply change to a 2-year appointed president.
Right.
Change it all.
All right, so it sounds like group 1. Group 1 is taking on the additional aspect of it. Okay,
Yeah, sounds good.
okay. So let's move on to group 3, because we are getting started.
Thanks.
That's Mike or David, but
We're Dylan.
group 3, okay.
Okay, so group 3 chose to look at section 305. Section 305 is a critical section within the charter, and it deals with budget and revenue, how budgets are spent and how revenue is raised. And when we looked at section 305, we noticed that there's a requirement for a supermajority 3 times in this section, and that on each of those occasions, the supermajority is different. So the first time it's brought up, the supermajority is a requirement of 7. The second time it's brought up is a requirement of 8. And the third time it's brought up, it's a requirement of a unanimous vote. So that's the issue that we chose to zoom into, whether or not we should make that those supermajorities consistent. And just broadly speaking, I think the perspective of the group was that it does not serve the council or the constituents well to have different supermajority requirements, that if you are considering revenue and spending, which are two sides of the same equation, it doesn't make sense for those levels requirement to be different. So that's the sort of broad discussion that we had. We went through each of those three options. You'll see in our proposals towards the end of the report. And in each case, we provided pros and cons to making those three supermajority requirements uniform at 8. And the reason we chose 8, in fact, we chose not to give a number, excuse me. It turns out that 8 would be the number under the current configuration, but the way we articulate it is a 2/3 majority rounded up to the next whole number, a 2/3 of sitting council members rounded up to the next whole number, which would be 8 under the current configuration. We thought 2/3 made a lot of sense because when we looked at the counties across Maryland, that is a threshold that turns up a lot. 2/3 majority that was talked about in previous discussions of this issue. There was precedent in the discussions of this issue. And when we raised this issue with Evan Glass and with Mark Elridge, neither of them had concerns about the issue of a supermajority. What they did have concerns was the issue of unanimity, requiring unanimity. So that was a consideration we took very seriously. You know, the advice from the county executive and so on in our last meeting. So going through the pros and cons, there is an advantage to a supermajority in serious and significant issues because that generates more buy-in, increased buy-in across the electorate and across the council. It reinforces comity, gives more voice to a range of views. We know that Montgomery County is a place with a large Democratic majority, and there is a risk of the tyranny of the majority. 51% or 50% plus one does risk that sort of issue of people being shut out of the conversation. So we considered that the supermajority in and of itself makes a lot of sense. We settled on 2/3 plus 2/3 rounded up to the next vote, which is in the case of 11, that's 8. We heard from the county executive that there's an issue currently that if there are vacancies, the hard and fast number in the charter is awkward, and so that's why we chose to go in the direction of 2/3 round up to the next vote, because if there's a vacancy, then that's 2/3 of the sitting members. So the 2/3 number would change if there's only 8 people on the council at that particular moment. 2/3 of 8 is different from 2/3 of 11, and yeah, and we're really interested in. So we made a real effort to put forward what we thought were very fair and balanced pros and cons for the county commission to consider. And what we would ask the county commission is to take a look at those pros and cons, and critique them, give us feedback on them, give us the benefit of your wisdom. We know the people around this table have been at this game a long time. So we really wanted to learn from the collective wisdom before we did a final sort of settled on a final report. So in this preliminary report, we made a real effort to be balanced and have pros and cons, equal number in each of the options, and so on and so forth. That doesn't necessarily end up being the way the final report gets written, because in the final report, it will be more of an advocacy case, but we did not want to be advocating at this point to the county. We want to just put the issues on the table and allow the county, the commission to sort of chop at it first. So that's, I'll put that out there and see what people have to say. And Mike or Dave, is there anything I didn't bring up that you think ought to be
Yeah,
brought up?
one thing, David, but one thing that I would add is we recognize that, the council has made changes to 305, section 305. And in fact, the, Charter Commission, previous, bodies of the Charter Commission have made changes, recommended changes to 305. So it's a kind of a continuing process, or almost continual improvement in the budget process over the years. So the fact that the council made a change just a couple of years ago doesn't necessarily prohibit us from recommending a change or having the council consider changes, and even having a referendum this coming year to make additional changes. The whole idea is to make it as rational and as effective as possible. And again, the fact that recent changes have been made shouldn't impact what makes sense and what are the best ideas today going forward. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the biggest change is the idea of no longer requiring unanimity for a tax change in the tax rate of the real estate tax or property tax. And that apparently only relates to homeowners and not to business property. Or, I'm not sure.
Let me ask for clarification on that, because I'm not sure that's right. Right now, the tax rates are required to be the same for both, right? I'm looking to Howard. By state law, they're required to be the same rate on both commercial and residential. And I think our executive has
State law,
talked to us about, he wishes the state would change that.
yeah, but it has to be the state.
Yeah, and that for some reason, the real estate tax was picked out to be the one that requires unanimity, though the other taxes that the council has as a discretion can be changed with a simple majority. And
Though
those
it wasn't picked out, that it was the result of a change in the charter that was made by a citizen petition
Oh, I
in
understand.
the past, yeah.
Yeah, I realized there was an election.
It was a different kind of process than the one we're engaged in now.
Right. But my point is that the council could, for example, increase the tax on bags. That nickel that you pay in the grocery store for the bag could be increased, but could be doubled if the council wished to by a simple majority. That doesn't necessarily result in a lot more in collections, because there's a bit of evasion in that collection anyway. But the other taxes that the council has at its discretion could also be raised by a simple majority. Those include the tax on amusement, hotels and concert tickets and so on. The tax on cigarettes, the tax on fuel, or energy for the fuel. You look at your Pepco bill and you'll see some taxes itemized in your bill that are paid to the county, or fees that are paid to the county. And I think there may be some others in your other utilities as well. And the council can change any of those taxes by a simple majority. For some reason, because of that vote, we have to have a unanimous decision on the real estate tax. And it would make more sense to go to a supermajority across the board. If the council has had to make a decision on the budget and in many cases, it would be possible for the real estate tax to have to change, even though the budget has not changed. Even though you have not had to consider whether there was a change based on the consumer price index or on the affordability guidelines, because you didn't get to those thresholds, but you still have to have even for a 1/100th of a mil change in the real estate tax rate, you have to have a unanimous vote.
Does anyone in group one, I know how the unanimous vote requirement got into the charter, but for the other two, the fact that they differ from each other.
Yeah.
And they have, the changes in 2020 were made to accommodate the expansion of the council size, but they were still different before that. So is there any indication, do we know why they were different in the first place, how they got to be that way?
We didn't do that kind of research to,
No,
you'd have to get minutes of council meetings, how many years ago to figure that one out.
Jim, that was why we wanted to take some time with one of the experienced lawyers to talk about issues like exactly that.
Because we're saying there's no logic to them being different, but somebody at some point thought there was. So I just-
Well, and the reason the other difference is that one threshold relates to changing the budget in excess of the change in the consumer price index.
Right.
And the other threshold relates to a budget which is in excess of the council's affordability guidelines. And the council feels more strongly, apparently, that the affordability guidelines need more stronger consensus to increase the budget than a consumer price increase. For whatever reason, when they made that decision, I don't know enough about the affordability guidelines to know how they differ from the consumer price index.
Well, I guess the question is, they got set by some vote too. So the question is, you're talking about overriding a previous decision. So it says, the first decision, if the first decision was made by majority vote, then your answer is, well, we want a super majority to override that, right? But I don't, I'm just
Well-
guessing, I'm just.
Yeah. Affordability guidelines
I
are.
had that same question. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the inconsistency and thinking, how did it come to be? So.
Well, I don't know. It's just a theory, but it could be that one year, one council member said, I'm not voting for the budget unless you do this, that, and the other thing. And they had to do it because it had to be unanimous. And they said, well, now we're gonna change the requirements so that it doesn't have to be unanimous, so that one council member would not be able to have a veto. I mean, that could be it.
So the partial answer is from Howard, it wasn't on my watch, it was before.
And I don't know.
I was on council, because don't blame me for this.
But the effect of the requiring a unanimous vote is exactly that one person
Right.
can veto a
Or
decision.
threatened to veto. That's what happened.
Say that raises a whole other host of questions of people who use it as leverage to get something they want.
Exactly. Or out of the budget, not only in, but out.
Becomes about, what about my district?
Or to put something here rather than there.
Exactly.
And we've seen how disastrous that can be with the Tommy Tuberville debacle in the Senate, with where one senator had the power to hold up military
Right.
appointments for 2 years.
All right, we do need to move on to group 4. So do we have any specific asks or requests, other asks or requests of group 1 before we move on to put us in a different mode of discussion when we come to February?
I just mentioned real quick, everyone has the hard copy of the charter, but if you go to the online version, it has some very helpful notes, editors' notes and annotations and citations. So that might be a helpful resource.
Okay, thank you.
That's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you, group 3. We will now move on to group 4, our newest.
Okay, should I speak?
That is up to group 4 members who I don't know what you said in advance, whether who was going to speak.
Yeah, if someone else wants to speak to group 4, please let me know. This is the document that was circulated. Was something that I wrote up. It was based basically upon the county executive's request. He was here last month. One of his top requests to the commission was to look at whether his authority for appointing non-merit personnel he should have hiring and personnel change authority versus having to go himself or with his office with himself versus having to go to the council to get approval. So the question basically is, should Charter Section 215 be modified to enable the county executive to fill specific non-merit positions without council approval? And then because at this point, there's no time limit on, council action on, the appointments that do need council approval. I added a section, the question, should council approval be subject to a time limit? Something similar to what other counties, have. I'll get into that in a minute. Something like 45 to 60 days. Okay, there's, pros and cons to this. We're talking specifically about, at this point in time, about 60 positions, that are non-merit positions. The chart provided by Dale, I guess, County Executive's Office. That itemize or show the different. So, to focus in on the specific positions that, would fall under this, question. So the county executive is asking for all these, by the way, all these positions at this point are non-merit positions, that is not covered by quote unquote civil service guidelines, requirements in the county. All these positions the council in order to be filled. What the executive is asking is that that the charter be modified to allow him to approve without council confirmation EX2 and EX3 positions. Now, Montgomery County, the size, the considerations are the size of the county.
Unknown caller.
The number of people working from Montgomery County, the size of the departments. Montgomery County has 30,000 roughly employees, more full-time equivalents. It's a county of $6 billion more. Basically, there's a complicated organization to run, and this is what basically the county executive was saying when he was here. So having some additional flexibility to fill positions without having to go to the council from a management standpoint, something that he would like us to consider and then make a recommendation to the council. So other counties in Maryland do have this particular model. Again, Montgomery County doesn't necessarily have to follow what other counties are doing, but it is informative. For example, Frederick County, the non-merit, as I understand it, the non-merit positions in Frederick County, you have to go to the council for approval, but there's a time limit. If the council fails to take action on those appointments within 30 days, they are soon to be filled. The pros and cons, just briefly. Montgomery County is a large county, a lot going on. If a position is particularly in the higher level positions, executive positions, is not filled for an extended period of time, then there's some uncertainty in the organization. And it could affect service delivery, as you might expect if a position working in a health related or safety related organization, Montgomery County, if that executive position is not filled on a timely basis, then that could cause problems, major problems for the county. So the timeliness of filling positions is important. And by giving the county executive permission to fill county non-merit positions without having to go to the council for approval, in theory, will enable him to manage the organizations more effectively. In theory. Okay, on the other side of the coin, there needs to be a balance of, if you will, balance of power, so that the council has legitimate oversight responsibilities to make sure that the executive and his organization are properly he's properly filling positions, and the people are doing from a policy standpoint what the council has authorized the legislators for them to be doing. The council at this point, by exercises its responsibility by reviewing the various positions and approves the positions. For questions and some due diligence that they feel that they need to do in order to make a decision whether positions should be filled or not filled by a particular person. Finally, there has been a concern over the years about non-merit positions, the number of non-merit positions growing over the years. However, the council is involved with making that decision. So a non-merit, you can't convert a merit position to a non-merit position without having the council approve that change. So the executive cannot unilaterally, the concern is, okay, if we give the county executives authority to hire 30 of the 60 people without having to go to the council to get their permission, what's to stop them from converting more merit positions into non-merit positions, willy-nilly going about filling those non-merit positions? The check and balance is that the council, it's only the council that can approve the changes from merit to non-merit. So they have to weigh in on that decision. Okay. I guess bottom line at this point is this is a preliminary draft. It's a response to the county executive's request for us to consider this. I think the plan would be to get everybody's response. Consider this, if you haven't looked at it already, give it some consideration, some thought in the next month. We can get a sense of where people are.
So let me add to this discussion. Mike, you did a very thorough job. And we did get to hear the executive's viewpoint. In the interim, right after the last meeting, kind of Keeling informed me that we do have a representative from the council who would like to share their perspective from the council side. And it's our council's executive director, Marlene Michelson. I had a brief conversation with her a couple of days ago, and I invited Mike to join me. So we had 2 years. She would like to address the commission directly by appearing before us at our February meeting, and I invited her to do so. So she will be on the agenda. She gave us a little preview of some of the concerns she has. But we'll hear them directly from her in February, so I'm not going to spend time going through that. But one of the issues clearly is the expansion of this class. So she wanted to point out how many positions in the last couple of years have been moved from the competitive hiring merit class into the non-merit political appointee class. With the assumption that they would move, knowing that the council would have oversight over qualifications for the confirmation process. And he does object to the idea of now taking those positions and removing them from all oversight so that they are basically pure appointees. It would be a new class of employees that are not subject to competitive hiring, but also not subject to council oversight for vetting on qualifications. It would be solely at the discretion of the executive, and we're very careful to have our discussions so as to not be talking about current council members and current executives. We're talking about prospective future occupants of the office who we don't know how they would use the authority or powers we're talking about here. So we're not actually pointing fingers at any one individual, but the idea would, do you want your future executive who you don't know to be able to appoint this many people as political appointees with no oversight? Because right now there are no such positions. It's either competitive or it's oversight. And question is, do we want, and how big a class are we going to have? Yes, we know how big it is now. Mike pointed out, we don't know how big it might be in the future, but that would be up to the council. So that's what's on the agenda for us to sort of develop the record.
Jim, I have something I wanted to say. Mike, thank you for this. This was really well done. I noticed in your change proposal, you left the number of days blank. I really like that addition of having a time limit on how long the council can hold these appointments. And obviously, I think you left that blank because you weren't sure what the right number is. I would like to propose 45 days as the number. And the reason I would propose 45 days as the number is if you propose 30 days and the council only meets every 30 days, then there's a risk of a future county executive putting forth nominations 2 days before the county council meets, and they don't have a chance to properly review them. But they're forced to take a vote at that meeting. So 45 days means there's a potential for two meetings, and that should be sufficient, but also denotes the urgency of getting these addressed in a timely manner. So that would be my proposal, or that would be my suggestion.
Following up on that, I had a question, and maybe I missed it from the county executive, but has there been a problem in the past where the council has not timely approved these hires?
Yes, the council takes and it doesn't come up very often. But if a vacancy occurs before a winter recess, the council is limited to 45 days a year, public hearings or council hearings. And if a vacancy occurs right before a winter holiday, then the vacancy theoretically could be or possibly be vacant for a number of weeks, perhaps 2 months.
And
so
does
that could result-
Dylan's 45 days cover that?
Well, that would encourage the council. It's something to be considered. I mean, something to be researched, but by putting a time clock on the appointment process, it would encourage the council to make their determinations before their recess, build it into the schedule during the year.
I'm inclined to think the time clock is an easier fix to this problem than giving carte blanche to the county executive to appoint people. That's just my gut.
So I'm going to have to move. We're coming close to our bewitching hour here. We're getting close to our dinner time. I will tell you that you will hear quite a bit from Marlene next month on this exact topic. She has very specific viewpoint. She will address these very directly. And I'm hoping I asked her to please bring some data if she can in terms of historic practices. They're working on it. So we're hoping that she will be able to bring actual quantitative analysis to the questions. And she has some very specific reasons why she has some problems with the time clock approach, but we'll hear that from her. But so you're all on the right page, I think, in terms of the questions we're asking.
Jim, I apologize. I do have a hard stop at 9:30. On that topic, what is our schedule for the next couple of meetings? Because I know we're supposed to get some public meetings on the calendar, right?
Correct. My next item to the agenda is to go directly to that, and I know you have to go, so why don't we move right to that now, actually. Our agenda calls for us to try to have some public outreach sessions between now and our February meeting. So that when we if we're taking a straw poll on February, we feel like we have some information from the outside. we have a couple ways to do this. We can do it in person, we can do it virtual. I'm suggesting that we try to mix it up to have some of both. I don't know that we'll have time for three. I would, ideally, we would have three. We do a weekday, we do a weekend, we do an evening. We do a couple virtual, we do one in person for people who aren't comfortable with virtual. I propose the schedule. You see, it's pretty broad. There's lots of room in there to pick dates, which we'll get to, but I want to get to CC since she has to leave, which is how we're going to approach getting, I mean, you can have sessions, but if nobody comes because they didn't know about it, it doesn't do you any good, and we're short on time. So, CC, do you want to talk about your ideas for how we would go forward and get public notice for the participants?
Yeah, I am concerned that trying to have our first public listening session on February the 3rd may be a little tight.
Right.
You know, it's just January the 10th that we haven't even decided to do it, let alone started the planning for it. So I think the first thing we need to do is develop an idea of how many listening sessions we want to do. Maybe we only have time to do 2. I would rather do 2 well done and well rounded than 3 kind of like with low attendance. So, you know, that's for, you know, the body to decide. What I would also do once we settled on a date and location is reach out with, you know, our organizational parties throughout Montgomery County that I know have a very active email list, and have them help us cross promote what the you know, in order to draw, you know, the public a widest cast of attendance whatsoever. And then we could also have it at our next meeting, talk about the agenda item. What does the public meeting looks like, develop the run of show, et cetera, et cetera. So those are my top ideas. And I'm passing them by to anyone who has strong feelings or inputs or questions.
Let me add an idea to this, which is, I agree with everything you said. I think I wasn't viewing it so much as a public meeting with a sort of a presentation or a back and I viewed it more like a council public hearing on, you know, when the people come and they present their views. Council members don't necessarily do a presentation or an oral discussion. They're just there to hear the public. But the burden of doing that means you have to tee up the issues well enough for people to understand what's on the table in advance, which means your public notice has to frame the issues in a way that they're prepared to come and talk without having an explanation of the issues. Because these tend to be relatively short, 90 minutes, so you may not have a lot of time to do that when you get there. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. So is it your opinion that the public listening session will be only on the items that we have taken a positive straw poll on, or which is my preference, so that we don't get a lot of public comment on things that we're not considering? Or is it going to be on everything that we've discussed?
Well, I guess the question is if we're not taking the straw polls until February, we would have to put the listening sessions off until after that, right? I mean, if you.
That would make sense.
I mean, the problem is if you take the straw poll and then you have the listening sessions, then you're gonna have to come back and after you hear what they have to say, you're gonna have to take another straw poll, which is fine. But you are going to get past to the point where you're going reserved enough time to actually write this report, which is due at the end of April. We have one meeting in early April. I mean, if folks are inclined to say, well, let's have 2 meetings, let's have an extra meeting, I know, I'm fine with that. I wasn't going to presume folks are up for a second meeting 1 month, but if we have to, we have to.
Jim, I don't think it makes sense to try and jam these in prior to our straw vote. I think it makes more sense to do the straw vote just so we know where we stand as a group, then go have the listening and then meet again to say, here's what we heard. Does that change anything that, you know, based on our prior straw votes?
So if we could do this, I think, I don't know what the calendar falls. I think our February meeting is like the 13th, 14th.
Yeah.
We would have our straw poll on the 14th, try to do listening sessions
End of February.
at the end of February, Then we have a meeting, I mean, what's our March meeting fall on the calendar? Anybody know?
March is the 13th.
So I would suggest if we don't meet again until the 13th, it's going to be very tight to have a drafting schedule that allows us to do two draft. I mean, I assume we're going to take two drafts, which is whatever our first draft is, people will comment on it and question it and debate it, and then we'll have to do a second draft. It's going to get really tight to do that. We definitely will need a second meeting. I don't know if that second meeting will come in March or April. It may be April because that'll give us the ability to approve a final report at the end of April instead of in the early April, which was going to be our date. So that might be fine. We'll have to play it out, but if that's what folks want to do, we'll do it. Do we have a consensus that let's do it this way? And if it means an extra meeting down the road, we'll do the extra meeting.
I'd rather do the extra meeting.
14th
We are meeting February 14th.
here in,
Yes. So
Valentine's Day.
Oh, that's right.
So that will, and that, the other advantage of that, Jeffrey and CC, is that it will give us a little extra time on the front end to do the planning. The listening
Mhm.
session. Okay?
Yes.
But do we have anybody strongly opposed to this method of operating? That being the case, that's what the plan will be. And that'll give us a little more time to work with staff for logistics of all this out, because I know there's some technical logistics. In terms of virtual and in person, is everybody comfortable doing when, you tell me, but I don't think we have a quorum requirement if we do listening sessions. We're not acting as a public body acting, we're just listening, right? That we have a quorum requirement for a public hearing listening session where we're not meeting as a body to act or discuss.
I don't believe we do.
I wouldn't think so, but that's how we did it in the federal world, but I don't know what the state law is.
even on the council.
Hmm?
Like even on the council, I don't think you need. I mean,
There's no quorum
Yeah,
requirement.
for a listening session, I don't.
Okay, so that gives us flexibility to say we'll have both virtual and person, and if not everybody can make all of them, that's fine. It's a public perception. We want a good showing so that people understand that this commission was serious and listen to them. But if we don't have, 8 or 10 out of people, we'll be fine, okay? That'll give us better schedule, and we'll do most of our communicating and orchestrating of the details of when and how and so forth by email. Since we're about to close this meeting. Work for people? Okay, good. You will note, I will note, that, at the very end of this agenda, I did sort of I saw this, our last commission did this, and I decided maybe I should start doing this. It's a looking ahead reminder of next meeting, just some of the things that we anticipate doing and taking up at our next meeting. So it gives you some clue of where we're going, in advance, gives you a chance to weigh in and going, I don't like this, and we missed this, and we should be doing that. Before we actually create our agendas, it's a little bit of a heads up, so if you want to have more input onto the agenda, this is a way to do it. It's helpful.
Are you distributing that, sit down?
Hmm?
Are you gonna distribute that?
Oh, it was part of the agenda.
yeah, I think already.
Last thing
on the bottom of the first page.
And then, last item before we close, report from staff on comments received. When I asked recently, I was told we had only 3 public comments. I read them all. But you folks will want a chance. And again, he's going to tell us how you can get access to those comments and whether or not we've received any more.
The commission has an official email address, so emails come through, staff is able to access them. And then we pass them on to the chair.
Oh, so you want me, I can do that. I didn't realize I was allowed to do that. You want me to pass them along that you sent them to me?
I was reporting that we have passed
Right,
them on
you
to
did.
you.
You want me to-
I'm
I'd
open,
rather you distribute it so the record shows that the office distributed them to everybody.
Sure.
Rather than have
we would do
it on my
that.
personal
So,
email.
is that, okay,
That's
we'll
easy.
share those with the rest of the
Try
commission.
not
And
to
I
make my
don't,
personal email part of the record.
um,
And I will tell you, one of them was from a member of the last commission who just wanted us to know the upheaval that occurred at the end and the letter they sent to the council. They wanted me to make sure I was aware of that, and I responded to them and said, yes, I'm very well aware of it. Thank you very much. The other 2 were folks who want us to delve into how the school board gets elected, which I don't believe is under our jurisdiction or purview at all. But that's what the other 2 comments were.
partisan.
I should also mention real quick that there was a press release that went out. That's something that happens. Our communications office helps push out messages on behalf of the commission. So if there's any information you want to share or have pushed out, there is a press release. You know, if you wanted information about how many hits they get or how, you know, the tracking, who's accessing that information, that's something I can ask the communications office to report back.
That might be useful. I think we're gonna have to figure out, when we schedule these listings, we're gonna draft some sort of a public information thing to attract attention to the public list. Bring the issues, but I think the way to go is registration, so we have an idea of how many people are attending. We need to know if we're gonna get 10 people or 100 people, or my guess is it's gonna be closer to that, but we need to have some ideas, so we'll be able to do that. All right. Do I hear a motion to adjourn since we're kind of past our time? Anybody have any comments before we adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
Second, all in favor? All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. This was a very good meeting.
Administrative question.
Yes. Yes.
You were about to speak.
No, I was about to remind the chair that you had a pending question.
And that is, our group met. We got together. And then is that a meeting that we are reimbursable
County
for?
governments.
And I know we can be reimbursed for pending. We don't get reimbursed for attending by Zoom. Or
You only get reimbursed for attending the physical meetings, regardless of what the expense is. No, we're not tracking mileage or, but there has to, if you physically attend the meeting, then yes, you're entitled to reimbursement. My understanding is that's only for the commission meetings or